Hello and welcome to Frankly Speaking, where we dive deep into regional headlines with leading policymakers and business leaders. I am Katie Jensen. As Western nations move to recognise the state of Palestine, the United Nations faces growing questions over whether this changes anything on the ground. Settlements are expanding, Gaza remains under siege, and the Security Council is paralysed by US vetoes. On this episode of Frankly Speaking, we hear from Stephane Dujarric, spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General. We ask if recognition can deliver real statehood. Will the UN confront allegations of genocide in Gaza? And is the Security Council powerless after 2 years of war? Thank you very much for joining us today on Frankly Speaking. Now, I will say it has been a significant period for Palestine at the UN General Assembly in just the past 2 weeks. Now, one of your UN bodies has described what is happening in Gaza as genocide, and this was followed by the two-state solution conference. And yet the Secretary-General still avoids using the word genocide. Frankly speaking, why?
Well, Katie, first of all, thank you for having me on. And I'm just sorry you're not here with us in New York at the UN to witness all the beehive of diplomatic activity. In regards to your question, I mean, the Secretary General, myself, have been very clear on this. It is the Secretary General in himself does not have the authority to declare something a genocide or not. That is, as far as we are concerned, and not just for Antonio Guterres, for every Secretary General, up to a judicial body. That aside, I think no one can accuse Antonio Guterres of having been soft in how he describes the situation in Gaza. For us, what is going on in Gaza politically, militarily, and legally is unacceptable. And we will continue to advocate for the people of Gaza. We will continue to advocate for a ceasefire, to get more humanitarian aid in, to get the hostages released, and to get us back on track to a political solution, regardless of how far-fetched that may be.
But while the Secretary-General, Mr. Guterres himself, may not personally rule on genocide, one of your own UN bodies has, the UN Commission on Inquiry. Shouldn't the United Nations speak with one voice?
If the United Nations could speak with one voice, it would not be the United Nations we have today. The United Nations is a conglomerate of entities, of experts, of legislative bodies. It is not an organization under a unified command. But I think we should not be focused on semantics and on words. We are focused on the situation on the ground. Regardless of whether or not you call it a genocide, what we do know is that civilians continue to be targeted and killed every day. People are under the state of famine in parts of Gaza, and not enough aid is getting in. That's the reality.
Okay, and I take your point there, and I don't want to keep drilling at this, but frankly, words do matter. Global scholars, including several Jewish experts on the Holocaust, they are calling this a genocide. A clear position from the UN would surely carry weight. Why won't Ms. Guterres call a spade a spade? Isn't silence from the UN effectively complicity?
I mean, anyone who calls the Secretary General silent on Gaza, frankly, hasn't been listening.
Well, it's a specific definition.
Hold on, Katie. When it comes, if you looked at the genocide in Bosnia and Rwanda, it wasn't Kofi Annan or another Secretary General who deemed it so. Those were courts, international courts. That's the way the process is for the Secretary General. But I mean, you're talking about a man who has been declared persona non grata in Israel because of the words he's been using to describe the situation in Gaza. I think he has been a highly vocal advocate in terms of what is going on in Gaza, and he has been a very strong leader in ensuring that the men and women of the UN stay in Gaza to help the people.
Okay, well, let me ask you then, because as the UK and many other Western nations are now taking the historic step of recognising the state of Palestine. Tell me, how is Mr Guterres supporting momentum for Palestinian statehood? And does he see tangible perspectives for change at this UN General Assembly?
Well, he has been supporting it by being a strong advocate for the two-state solution, which by definitions means a state of Israel and a state of Palestine. I think he's been very encouraged by the meeting we had on Monday on this issue, the numbers of countries that came forward, notably the official announcement by France that it would recognize the state of Palestine. That push is really about keeping hope alive, because a two-state solution is our goal. And we have to keep that alive at the darkest hour in which we are living now, or let's rephrase that, in which the people of Gaza and the occupied West Bank are living now. So we have to focus on both things at the same time: the long-term goal of the two-state solution and alleviating the humanitarian situation in Gaza and getting the hostages out.
Well, tell me, the majority of UN members already recognise Palestine. Now, does the Secretary-General believe that UN mechanisms are actually capable of translating this diplomatic shift into real change on the ground? Or would you say that President Trump is correct? Of course, he spoke this week and said, and I quote here, "All they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war."
Well, I think recognizing, for one state to recognize another state is not just empty words. It is an act of recognition, an act of recognizing that there is such a state, which is, let's put it frankly, not a gift to the Palestinian people, but the right that they have to have a state, just like the Israelis have a right to have a state. But ultimately, there will need to be political courage on the Israeli side, on the Palestinian side, to come to an agreement to end this conflict. And whether it's the Secretary General or member states, those who have influence over one or the other of the parties need to push and use that influence in a positive manner.
Okay, so what role does the UN see in building the foundations of a Palestinian state? Because obviously we've seen years of UN support for schools and institutions. That has been totally wrecked by the war, settlements and Israel's withholding of Palestinian tax revenues. So with France now talking about a post-war Gaza, tell me, does the Secretary-General see the UN taking a bigger role?
Well, again, it depends which UN are you talking about. I think the General Assembly, the main legislative body, has been very clear. On the ground, you're right. We have UNRWA, who is helping and supporting the Palestinian Authority. We will continue to do whatever we can. But at the same time, we have to recognize there are facts being created on the ground by the Israeli expansion of settlements. Something we have been very vocal in denouncing, is there are legal under international law. And again, everyone has a role to play. The Secretary General, the leaders of various countries, we all need to be pushing in the same direction. And unfortunately, we're not all pushing in the same direction at this point.
Well, let me ask you about that in terms of moving in the other direction, because the US administration says that recognizing Palestinian statehood would reward Hamas for the October 7 attacks. Do you see that argument as valid?
I don't really understand that argument, frankly, because Hamas's goal is not a two-state solution. I don't see that in the Hamas charter or in the rhetoric from Hamas. Hamas doesn't believe in the rights of Israelis to have a state. Hamas doesn't recognize the Palestinian Authority. So again, it's not a gift to Hamas. On the contrary, it is recognizing the right of the Palestinian people to have their state, just as the Israelis have a right to have their state. And in fact, recognizing the two-state solution is a statement against extremists.
So, if recognition then is separate from Hamas, the real obstacle seems to be Israel itself. Now, the government has flatly rejected a Palestinian state and is pushing ahead with the E1 settlement plan. Do you now expect Israel to accelerate land grabs that make statehood impossible?
I can't speak for the Israeli government or predict what they will do. I can only look to what actions this current government in Israel has been taken, and the expansion of settlements has clearly been one of their major policies, and one that we have been very vocal in denouncing.
Well, tell me, if settlements do end up expanding anyway, is outside diplomacy the only hope? Saudi Arabia and France, of course, have said that they are reviving the two-state push. Tell me, how effective have these efforts been so far?
Well, I mean, I think, listen, you are as well versed as to reality on the ground as I am. I think what we have to push is that the Saudi role, the French role, the American role be used in kind of from the same song sheet. Now, clearly, we're not there at this point, but it doesn't mean that we can't keep pushing for that direction.
Well, when we look at this genocide ruling, I mean, the Commission of Inquiry on Palestine, that actually ruled it a genocide. They did conclude Israel's actions amount to genocide. Tell me, is the Secretary General under pressure to be able to formally recognise those findings?
I don't know if he's under pressure. Obviously, he's getting questions. I'm getting questions like you're questioning me today. Our position is what it is. But again, I mean, we have been so harshly criticized by the Israeli government for what the Secretary General has been saying about the situation in Gaza, what UN staff have been doing in Gaza. I mean, we've been accused of being terrorists, which in fact just increases the risk to our own UN staff. So I think the Secretary General is very much comfortable in the position he's taken, and I think in the very strong and consistent position. His position has not changed since the aftermath of the terror attacks by Hamas. The issue of genocide for us is a legal one. The reality is what it is, and we will continue to denounce it.
It does feel like accountability has hit a wall at the Security Council. The US has again vetoed a ceasefire call. Doesn't one country's veto now mean that war continues? And isn't that destroying UN credibility worldwide?
Well, again, I think, as I mentioned, the UN is not a centralized under a centralized command. The credibility of the Security Council has taken a lot of hits recently. We've seen a lack of unity on the part of the Security Council, not just on Gaza, but on Ukraine, on Syria, when the Assad regime was in power, on Sudan. And that does hurt the UN brand. In that sense, you are correct. But I think it's important for your viewers to understand the different component parts of the UN, whether it's the legislative bodies, the normative bodies, or the role of the Secretary General. Because even if there's deadlock in the Security Council, it doesn't mean that our own people are not in Gaza trying to exploit the little humanitarian space they're being given to try to help the people of Gaza.
Sure, but isn't that structure outdated and frankly incompatible with the realities of 2025, 2 years into the war on Gaza, over 65,000 dead and a famine declared? I saw you told TNT World in an interview earlier this week that you wanted to help the UN adapt and reform this organisation to make it more representative of the world that we live in today, as opposed to 1945. It's something President Macron also spoke about this week. Tell me, what are the reform proposals that are seriously being considered today?
You're absolutely correct. We need a reform of the Security Council because I think, as you alluded to before, the Security Council is the beating heart of the UN in terms of peace and security. It remains a reflection of the world of 1945. The fact that it continues that way keeps hurting the UN brand globally. Now, we're not close to Security Council reform, but we are much more, the membership is much more engaged in it now than it was, from what I stand, more than 10 years ago. So there is movement. The Secretary General has been advocating very strongly for an African seat. The fact that Africa is the only continent that is not represented on the Security Council is abhorrent, especially given so much of our peace and security agenda is in Africa, and member states need to find a way to adapt their own organization, the UN, the one they created, to make it more effective, to make it more credible, and to make it more representative of the world of 2025.
Sure, but tell me, if Mr. Guterres has no power to fix the system as it stands today, does he only have moral authority left? Is there any scenario that you could see where he would ever consider resigning in protest over the repeated US vetoes of the ceasefire resolutions for Gaza?
I think resigning, for the Secretary General to resign would be a gift for those people who find him a little too annoying. So he has absolutely no plans to resign. He's determined not to give up, as he said in his General Assembly speech. He's committed to continuing to push for the ideals of the Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and for justice throughout the world.
Well, President Trump has said the UN isn't playing any real role in mediation, given that conflict resolution is part of Mr. Guterres' job. Doesn't he have a point? It feels like there is a perception that the Secretary General is acting rather passively.
I think the Secretary General and his envoys have been very much involved in conflict resolution in Sudan, in Syria, in Ukraine. We saw the grain initiative that Mr. Guterres put forward. And, you know, in terms of President Trump, the Secretary General and President met yesterday at the start of the meeting in front of cameras. Mr. Trump said he supports the UN 100%. He doesn't always agree with it, but he's very much backs it and he supports it. And frankly, the two of them had a very good meeting that was very much focused on peace and security, and especially in Ukraine.
Okay, well, tell me, if the Security Council is paralysed as we stand today, what are the alternatives that Mr. Guterres is exploring to actually secure a ceasefire?
Well, he has been very much in contact with the Qatari, the mediators. He stays in contact with the Egyptians. We've been using a lot of back channels, and we will continue to push for a ceasefire to get humanitarian aid in, to see an end to the conflict, and to see the hostages released.
So tell me, in light of Israel's ground offensive in Gaza, the UN inquiry accusing Israel of genocide, does the Secretary General believe that the Charter's promise of never again is being fulfilled, or has the UN become powerless to enforce its founding promise?
Well, I think the Security Council has not lived up to its promises in terms of being the focus of stopping wars and of peace and security. We have to keep the promise of an end to conflict alive. The Secretary General will continue to advocate for it, and not only advocate for it, but to work for it through different means, and he will do so until the very last day of his mandate.
Well, Mr. Dujarric, let's hope that is the case. Thank you very much for joining us on Frankly Speaking. I know it's a very busy week for you. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you.